Hi guys, Steve Blankard here. Hey, a couple days ago I made a Facebook post about installing a new voltage regulator on my 48 CJ2A, and I had to repair some of the wiring. I had a lot of bubble wiring on it, and I showed a little bit about how I repaired some of that wiring and how to make it safe and secure. I was asked to make a brief video on how I do soldering. So, I learned how to solder in the Navy. I was in the Navy for 20 years. I'm a retired chief, so I've learned a lot of tricks in doing it. Soldering isn't hard, just having the right equipment and right tools to do it right. Crimping on terminals is kind of a quick and easy way to do it, but they're really not good. Uh, Now, typically, you can buy these terminal sets. I get these at Harbor Freight, and I also get shrink tubing kits. They're perfectly good, but I don't use these as crimpers, as crimp terminals. So open up, you can get a box full of terminals, and they're all real. They're good terminals. These are set up for crimping, and they all have these plastic insulators on them that you just crimp over. And while I don't like the crimp on using these as crimp-ons, the terminals themselves are good. So what I do is I'll remove you can see this, I remove that red or whatever color it is plastic sleeve over it. I usually just take a razor blade and I'll slice it downward. That'll loose enough where I can just wiggle it off. So they're perfectly good to use. So I've already set up a couple of those to use here. So let me get this out of the way. So I've done a couple terminals here that I've already stripped off. You can see I've stripped off the plastic insulator, and I've got some shrink tubing also that's the right size. Now, when you get your terminals, there's two different things you need to look at. You need to look at the size of the hole for the wire, and you match that to the size of the wire you're going to use. And then they also come in both ring and slotted terminals in different size for the screw that it's going to go under. So you need to match both of those. So I don't really like these slotted ones, but I'm going to use these just for the demo. So when you solder, you need a heat source. So these are very common, these pencil soldering irons, and I've had this one for years and used it many times. But it's only about 25 watts, so it's only for really small wire, and it takes a while to heat up. I mean, it works well, within its limitations, but uh, you know, but if you have the opportunity, I really recommend getting a nice solder gun. Now, this is a Weller. These come in a nice kit with a carrying case with solder and extra stuff with it, and some uh, flux. The word I'm looking for, flux, comes with a nice kit. This is around 35 bucks at Lowe's or Home Depot, and it really works well. There's two different heat settings where the trigger heats up very quickly. So this is what I'm going to use here today. So when we're soldering, one thing that's important to remember is you don't want to put direct heat on the solder itself. You always want to solder. You want the heat to go, in this case, onto the terminal, and so the heat draws the solder in. So I'm going to show you how I do this. So first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of wire, and you strip the wire to about the same length as the round part here of the hole. So you're going to slip that. You just kind of I twist it a little bit. Slip the wire into the hole here. Get it in place. Now, right now it's really loose. I don't want it to fall off, so I'm going to very lightly crimp it with these crimpers. Now, I don't like crimp. When I say I don't like crimping, I don't like using those crimp-on connectors. I'm doing this. Oops. Well, try that again. I'm doing this just for that reason, so it doesn't fall off while I'm soldering it. So I'll hold it there. I'll put the crimpers on it, and I'll just give it a light crimp just so it won't fall off. So now it will stay in place. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to heat it on the bottom of the terminal here. I'm going to put the soldering gun, or the tip of the soldering gun, on the bottom of this round area. That will heat that area up. Then we'll touch the solder up in the top and draw that in. Now, as for solder, what I'm using is 60-40 solder. 60% tin, 40% lead. It's just a good electrical grade solder, and this is rosin core. It has rosin inside it a little bit, and rosin is a flux that cleans the metal as it heats up and flows in. But also, it's good to have a little extra flux, and I got a little little thing here of it that came with the kit. You can also just buy it in tins like this. One tin will last you forever. So what I'm going to do is first I need to get a little bit of solder on the tip of the soldering iron so it'll transfer the heat to the bottom of the connector. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna pull the trigger. I'm going to get it really hot. I'm going to dip my solder. Even though it's rosin core, I'm going to dip a little more in there. You can see how fast it heats up. It's already smoking. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit on here, and that gives me some nice fresh solder to transfer the heat. Okay, so I'm going to set this down for a minute. So what I'm going to do just to hold this in place to make it easier to solder, I got this little finger holdy thingy, and I'm just going to set this in here in a good position, and get my solder ready. Now, one thing to remember to do before you solder, and this one happens to have a open end, but you want to make sure you remember to put your shrink tube on. If it's a closed wire, you want to make sure you put that on before you put the terminal on, because this is going to slide up and cover the soldered joint. So I'm going to set that here. Okay, so I'm going to heat this up. And remember, as you can see here, I'm going to touch it to the back side, the bottom side of the terminal. I'm going to let it get hot. And this only takes, just a few seconds to get really hot. Make sure that solder's not melted good. Okay, now I'm going to touch it to the bottom. And, oops, I need to turn this around here. I'm sorry. So I got the open end of the terminal right here. And I'm going to feed that solder into that open end. So I'm going to touch the solder gun up to it. Make sure I get fresh solder on there. And this takes maybe 10 seconds. And then I'm going to touch the solder here right into the opening, the end of the terminal, and feed some solder in. See it flowing in? I hope you can see this. I'm going to hold the gun on here for a couple of seconds just to make sure I'm drawing that solder all the way down into the wire, and then take it off. So now I've got a nicely soldered joint. I don't know how well you can see this here, but the solder has flowed down into the end of the terminal, down into the strands of the wire, and it's completely locked in place there. Locked in place, and that's not going to come off. So that's how I solder that in place. You can see it's a good solder joint. The solder flowed down inside in the terminal through the strand, so it's got a good electrical contact. One of the weak points of using a crimp-on connector is when you crimp it, you're only making electrical contact around the perimeter of the wire, and so that reduces the efficiency and allow the current flow through the wire. With a solder joint, the solder flows down in between all the strands of the wire, so that conducts the electricity better. It also prevents corrosion, because in a crimp joint, especially in a wire that's exposed somewhere, you can get water and salt and such from the roads into that crimp joint and corrode the wire and cause it to break. And then lastly, also a crimp connector, if you crimp them, people tend to over crimp them, and then the wires break. I mean, they just crush those fine copper wires, and pretty soon the terminal will break off. So this is a nice strong solder joint. So then for the shrink tube, if this was a closed end of the wire, I would have already put this on, and you slide it down about 6 inches so the heat from the solder doesn't get to it. So in this case, I'm just going to slip it on here. So you just bring the shrink tube up over the shank of the terminal like that, and I just use a lighter and hold it a couple inches below it, or an inch or so below it, rotate it, and that's going to cause that shrink tube to tighten up and shrink right over the joint. And there we go. I hope you can see that well. That's a completely nicely soldered and insulated solder joint. So I hope you found that helpful. While we're here, I'm going to show you one other trick I learned in the Navy. Sometimes you're just in some place where you don't have a solder gun. It's just not convenient. Now, thinking of your Jeeps, this is something, you keep some of this solder in your Jeep, keep a few pieces of that shrink tube in there, and let's say you got to do a wire repair, whether it's putting two wires together or putting a terminal on, but you don't have a solder gun. So what are you going to do? All right, so what I'm going to do is I've already got this extra terminal here already prepared. You keep some of these terminals, whatever you need in your kit in the Jeep, and you know, this you don't have to have a whole spool of this wire of this lead solder, just a small amount put in your toolkit. And so what we're going to do is, again, I'm going to crimp this on just a little bit so it doesn't fall off, just lightly, just a light crimp. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I solder with a cigarette lighter. And it works quite well as long as you're not in a windy position. So let me get this in place here. So when you're soldering with a flame, and you can even do this with a torch if you're very careful. Hopefully you can see this well enough. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little extra flux on the solder here. So I'm going to heat up the terminal, but just with a lighter. But you don't want the flame on the terminal. You want it down below. I hope you can see this. I've got the flame, you know, maybe an inch below the terminal. There's so much heat coming off that little tiny flame, it's going to heat up that terminal. And it won't take long, and it'll get hot enough where I can start flowing the solder. But when I put the solder in, I got to move the flame out of the way, or it'll melt the solder right off, right at the end of here, instead of melting in the joint. So let's see here. Let me see how this is. I'm going to take this away. See that solder flowing right in there, just like that. Flows right in. Again, hold the lighter underneath it for a couple seconds just to draw the solder all the way down deep into the joint. Make sure it's a good joint, and that'll do it. So now it's hot. I hope you can see this, but hope you can see how good. But it soldered just as well as it did using the iron. Drew that solder right in, and I got a nice tight joint. So I think that's everything I wanted to show you. I hope you find this helpful. You know, this is kind of fun stuff, but you know, I guess I take it for granted everybody knows how to do some of these things, and I've just been doing it for so long. You know, I just go ahead and do things. But I'm glad to share it with you. Everybody got any questions about how to do this stuff? Let me know, and I'll try and help out. All right, thanks a lot. Talk to y'all later.